Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And what's up? Welcome in. GC Live Friday episode of the show, South Carolina versus Clemson. Final preview edition as we give all of our final thoughts on this weekend's matchup. Happy Thanksgiving. Hope y'all had a great one. Happy South Carolina Clemson week. The rivalry game right around the corner. Williams-Brice Stadium, 7:30 kickoff. SEC Network. And hard to believe, finally, the final game of the year as South Carolina looks to make it 2 in a row against Clemson. And we're going to go ahead. We're going to go right out to our special guest. It is Matt Connolly, initially of Clemson Sports, now working for On 3 over there in the news desk. Matt, what's going on, man? I think we got a mic problem, unless it's just on my end. Is it on your end too, Chris?
Yeah, can't hear Matt quite yet.
Here, I'm gonna remove Matt and see if he can.
Bye,
See, Matt's
Matt.
probably saying we should have tested this beforehand. We don't really do that, Matt. We just we just like roll right into it.
We don't do preparation around here.
We've got information prepped, like we know what we're gonna talk about. But
yeah,
let's try this one more time. Let's try to add Matt. Matt.
Nope.
No, we don't got you. I'm gonna all right. I'm gonna send this to Matt's phone. Is what we're gonna do. I think that might be the way we'll have to go. But Chris, do you want to tell everybody about Clint Hammond while I get Matt invited?
Love to tell people about Clint Hammond. Clint Hammond of Movement Mortgage, of course. ClintHammond.com and 803-771-6933. Clint's our guy. Wes, I bet Clint is just almost boiling over with anticipation for the game. So if you are in the market to buy a home, if you want to invest in a property, if you need a mortgage for whatever reason, Clint's your guy. He's always been our guy. You know about him. A lot of you OGs have been watching us for quite a while. You've seen Clint from the very beginning. He's been with us a while. We greatly appreciate his support of the show. And he's a Gamecock, right? So if you need a mortgage for any reason, hit him up. He can walk you through the process. He's outstanding at what he does. He's a big Gamecock. You'll probably spend about, I don't know, Wes, what do you think? Half and half of the time talking Gamecocks, talking mortgages. He can do both with you. So give him a call, 803-771-6933. Or, of course, ClintHammond.com.
Yeah, Clint's the man. I know Clint is pumped for this game at Williams-Brice Stadium. And we'll effort getting Matt on here in a second. Going to work on getting him on via his phone because sounds like the browser is not cooperating with us. But Chris, big game, obviously, and one that South Carolina fans are obviously excited about as well. And Matt's going to come on and give us the Clemson sort of view of things. Matt, like I said, used to directly cover Clemson, still follows that program, and now is working at On 3 in a different role. Let's try it again, Matt. Do we got you now, man?
I hope so. Can y'all hear me?
There we
go.
There's the beautiful sounds of Matt's voice. Matt, appreciate you joining us, man. I hope you're doing well. I know you got limited time here, so let's dive right into it. What is the biggest difference in the Clemson team that South Carolina beat last year and the Clemson team that's going to roll into Williams-Brice Stadium tomorrow evening?
So I think the biggest thing is probably the defense, and it's just the way that they're playing pass defense. I know that they've given up some yards this year at times, and particularly struggled a little bit against Drake May last week. But for most of the year, they've been really, really good in pass defense. Nate Wiggins has been excellent. The past 3 games in particular, Clemson's pass defense has been really good. And not to take anything away from some of the older guys that were playing early in the year, but I think that going to the bench and having some guys get banged up a little bit, having to play some of these young guys like a Khalil Barnes, like an Avion Terrell, really talented players, Shelton Lewis, who weren't really playing early in the year because there were seniors that were back that were kind of had been starters for a while, and so they kind of were just keeping their roles. But man, against Georgia Tech, they picked off Haynes King 4 times. They were able to turn Drake May over a couple times last week. I mean, they've really done a good job here lately. Now that they've kind of moved in some of these younger guys into the mix defensively, so I think that's probably the big difference. And you may want to talk about this later, just another topic, but really the biggest similarity I think is just the way that they're turning the ball over and how they don't have a lot of confidence in the passing game. Clemson doesn't. So, I think in some ways offensively it's a very similar team to last year, and defensively it's different in that they're doing a better job against the pass.
Matt, appreciate you joining us, man. So let's talk about the injuries. You mentioned how some of the younger players stepped up in the secondary after some guys got banged up and things like that, which kind of, I guess, blessing in disguise type of thing. But it seems like this Clemson team is pretty banged up, especially at the wide receiver position. So the best you can in this day and age of college football, can you update us on just the overall health of this team? And then, the most important guys that may be banged up or completely out for this game.
Yeah, for sure. So at receiver, they're very banged up. Bo Collins is not expected to play. He got hurt last week against North Carolina, plantar fascia injury. So he will be out for the game. Cole Turner is a guy who started this season. He's out for the year, but he was a starter at the beginning of the year. So he will be out for the game. Antonio Williams, I don't expect to play. I would be really surprised. Dabo's kind of held on hope, but has said throughout that it's most likely that he will be back for the bowl game. So he's a guy that hadn't played in several weeks. I don't think he'll be back. Tyler Brown is healthy, so that's the one good thing. If you're Clemson, I think he should be fine. He should be good to go for the game, although he's battled some shoulder stuff at times this year. Adam Randall is going to play, but he's not 100%. I believe it's his hand. He has a broken bone, and I can't remember if it's his left or his right hand, but he has a broken bone in his hand that he's kind of playing through. So, he'll be out there. How effective he'll be is to be determined. So, I mean, you're talking about 4 or 5 of their probably top 5 or 6 receivers that are either out or doubtful or going to play while injured. So, yeah, it's a very banged up group of receivers. It's really Tyler Brown, Jake Brenningstool, the tight end. And then after that, maybe Troy Stellato, maybe like a Hamp Green type. I mean, it's very similar to a couple of years ago when Clemson came to town and South Carolina, and they were starting Will Sweeney against South Carolina. Like it's kind of gotten to that point again where they're just really, really banged up, on that side of the ball, particularly at receiver.
Matt, you mentioned just the turnovers and how that's been an issue for Clemson this year. And, I've always thought turnovers are somewhat random, and it's really hard to count on your turnovers in order to get stops. We've seen South Carolina's defense at times be very reliant on getting those turnovers in order to get stops. So I feel like it's hard to count on those when you're predicting a game, but at the same time, at what point sort of is this just kind of who Clemson is? Like they are a team that turns the football over. Like I know South Carolina last year, kind of as the year progressed, we saw they were just a team that just tended to put the ball in danger, and it got them hurt. This year, they've actually, after an offseason of just preaching the heck out of it, they've been a pretty good team at protecting the football. So how much can South Carolina count on possibly having some opportunities to get the ball off of Clemson?
Yeah, you say at what point can you? I mean, at this point, like you can say it. I mean, that's just who they are. Like they've done it every single game. I know Dabo talked early in the year about some bad luck and if they weren't turning the ball over, they'd be blowing teams out. And if you want to be honest, like they've had several other games or even several other times, I should say, during games where they could have had even more turnovers. I mean, they've had a ton of opposing teams that have dropped interceptions this year. So, can you count on turnovers? I don't know that you can say you can count on turnovers, but I think it's fair to say that you can count on getting opportunities for turnovers. Like whether you recover the ball when it's on the ground, whether you catch the ball when it hits you in the hands, that's something that South Carolina is going to have to determine on their side of things. But there are definitely going to be opportunities there where the ball is going to be in jeopardy, and it's just a matter of being able to make a play. But yeah, I mean, it's happened every game. They've looked much better. Clemson has the last few games. as far as scoreboard, finding ways to win, that kind of stuff. But they still turned the ball over, even against North Carolina. They turned it over against Georgia Tech. They've continued to turn the ball over. It's just that they've also gotten some turnovers, so it hasn't really showed up on the scoreboard. But yeah, I mean, Cade is a quarterback who's going to take a ton of chances. That's just what he does. And so, the opportunity will be there. Sometimes it'll work out for him, and sometimes it works out for the defense where they get a big play. But yeah, it's definitely a team that will put the ball in jeopardy.
Matt, I was going to ask you about Cade Klubnik, from watching Clemson this year and kind of following things. He certainly had, a pretty heavy hand in a lot of those turnovers. There's been I like the way that Tyler Head on 107.5 put it. He's gone into business for himself a bunch of times where he just decides that, here's actually what we're going to do in this instance. It seems like they've got to, it seems like they've got to lead the country in red zone fumbles, kind of inexplicable. But how do we know? Is the answer we don't know what version of Cade we're going to get, right? Like it might be, you might see the good and the bad within the same game, but that seems very important to me.
Yeah, he's consistently inconsistent. Like he's going to make some plays where you say, "Oh man, this guy's really good. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. He fits the ball in, or he has the potential to be." And then you're also going to see some plays where, like you said, he just kind of does his own thing. He throws the ball up where he has no business throwing it. He threw a really bad pick against Charleston Southern where he was just scrambling backwards on his back foot and just threw a ball up for grabs, and it landed right into the guy's hand. You ran it back for a pick six. He just does things where it's like, what are you doing? I know last week against North Carolina, there were 6-7 seconds left in the half, and he just kind of called his own number and ran it in. And Dabo said after the game, the last thing we told him before that play was, whatever you do, don't run the ball. And so he just, he got in a situation where he dropped back and the pressure came and he didn't see anybody open and they had no timeouts. And so it's either a touchdown or it's halftime. And Dabo said, we told him no matter what, don't run it here. We have to get points on the board. And he just put his head down and tried to score. He said afterwards it was kind of just instincts taking over, but that's something that if you're Clemson has happened way too many times this year. It happened against Miami where the last play in overtime was supposed to be a called handoff, and he kind of watched the play unfolding and just decided he was just going to keep it and try to beat the outside linebacker to the edge. Didn't beat him. The game ended. It obviously worked out for them against North Carolina, but there's been multiple times this year where he's had directions, hey, make sure you do this on this play, and it's just kind of done his own thing. And so, in some ways, I guess it's okay to have kind of that gunslinger mindset and, hey, I'm going to go out there and try to make a play. But at the same time, Dabo made it clear after the North Carolina game that he was really frustrated and shook his head several times, and it's called it the worst play that's ended up good that he thinks he's ever seen in his life. So definitely something that Clemson, I think the coaching staff just wants him to kind of trust the game plan more, do what they call, that kind of stuff. Even though it worked out against North Carolina, because there are several times this year it hasn't.
And it's really not that they're one-to-one comparisons on skill set, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of Devin Leary last week against South Carolina. Like he had some throws on third downs and some not on third downs, but he had some big boy NFL throws in that game where you're just like, man, South Carolina had pretty good coverage on that play, and he just fit it in there. And then he had some other plays, of course, the interception to even worry, but there were some deep ball misses. There were some really Carolina had a shot at 2-3 other interceptions maybe. So the ball was in danger kind of all night long, it felt like to me. And Matt, we've kind of been playing with this concept, and Chris mentioned it early on the radio, of if you're South Carolina, you got to do enough to make it matter. Like you got to do enough to where your quarterback advantage can kind of show through. And I think that's probably true on both sides. Like, can South Carolina play well enough up front to protect Rattler just enough, or to get the running game going just enough that he can kind of cook and make things happen? Then on the other side, I'll go back to a game you mentioned from a couple of years ago. If Clemson just says, look, Cade, we're going to give you this conservative game plan, and we're going to make you stick to it, run the football, and we're going to keep running the football. The South Carolina defense, which I do think is improved against the run compared to that team, that night it just felt like Clemson didn't have to throw. They didn't have to throw a single pass.
Yeah.
I think for this game, it's not that you have to stop Shipley and Phil Moffitt. It's more you got to at least make Clemson feel like they have to have some level of balance, I think.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of Clemson people kind of referencing back to that game 2 years ago. And it was just such a different game to me in that, like, Jason Brown was your quarterback for South Carolina, or Zeb Nolan, I think, came in at some point. Like, there was just no threat at all, really, the entire game that South Carolina was going to do anything offensively. I don't think South Carolina had confidence. Clemson obviously had no confidence that they were going to be able to do anything. I think this is different in that South Carolina does have playmakers, obviously, Xavier Legette. They have a quarterback advantage with Rattler, who I think when he's had time this year has been as good as about anybody in the country. So I do think it's different in that regard. Where I think it's similar is that if Clemson's able to control the ball on the ground and if South Carolina can't get stops, and it's still like I still don't think South Carolina is going to make enough plays in the passing game to where they're going to get into a shootout with Clemson if they can't stop the run. Like I think that they're going to have to get some stops, force some turnovers, and try to win a relatively low-scoring type close game. Because if you're just letting Clemson run up and down the field the whole game without having to pass the ball to really make plays, I think you're going to be in a long night for South Carolina. I just don't think that they're going to be able to score enough on Clemson's defense to keep up if it gets to a high-scoring type of game.
So therein lies another question, Matt. And obviously you got to kind of predict how things are going to play out, but also some analysis of what you've seen the past few weeks as Clemson has seemed to play a lot better. Is this team built to run the football really well? We saw in the Clemson Carolina game last year, Will Shipley had, I think, over 8 yards a carry. In hindsight, should have run the football more, right?
Right.
But they've run it pretty well, it seems like, the past few weeks. Now, they are playing at home. They played at home the past few weeks. South Carolina on their winning streak. They've played at home. Both teams are playing better. Probably no coincidence there. But I agree with Wes that Carolina's been a little bit better against the run this year, maybe in some cases markedly better. But is this Clemson team built with some of the offensive line changes we've seen, what you've seen from the past few weeks? How good of a running team is Clemson right now?
I think that they've improved in that. I think part of it is they've gotten like less complicated, and they were doing a lot of like, let's pull a guard here and doing different things in the running game. And I think that they were having missed assignments because of that. They were allowing people to shoot the gaps, and they've kind of just lined up and just tried to say, hey, we're going to be more physical and just run it at you and stop it if you can lately. And that's worked out better for them. But I mean, there are times this year, if you go back and watch like the Miami game, for instance, even NC State, there were times where it was just a wasted down. I mean, they at one point, I think that they had 35% of their runs had gone for 1 yard or less, which is just not a good set at all. I think it was close to 50% of first down runs were like for 1 yard or less. So at one point this season, and that was, I think, after the NC State game when I checked that stat. So at one point this season, they were really struggling. The last 3 games, they've been better. So, it's hard to say. I mean, I think that certainly at times this year they've been able to run it really, really well. But there are also times where they've struggled to get anything going into the running game. And so, it's I know it's not a great answer, but it really just kind of depends on which team shows up and how they show up.
Matt, I know you probably don't have much longer, man, but I guess what are some final keys here for you to this game? And real quick, have you been surprised that it seems like it's been, and correct me if I'm wrong, hasn't it been a little bit more of a true split with Shipley and Maffa this year as opposed to kind of just being the Will Shipley show?
Yeah, it was more of the Will Shipley show early in the game or early in the season. And then he missed the Notre Dame game, and Maffa just came in and ran all over Notre Dame and had the best game of his career, well over 100 yards. So he really won the Notre Dame game for him. Now, he did fumble in the end of the game with like 2 minutes left to give Notre Dame, like Clemson was about to nail the ball and the game was over. He fumbled with 2 minutes left just because that's what Clemson's done all year. Like you think, all right, yeah, there's no way anything can go wrong here, and then they put the ball on the ground. So it has been more Maffa, more of a split here the last few weeks after Shipley came back from the Notre Dame game, and And Dabo said, we've got to get Moffa the ball more. I mean, he's playing too well to not get him more carries. So yeah, as far as keys to the game, I think we've talked about a lot of them, but for South Carolina, I think it's someone other than Legette stepping up and making plays. I mean, I think Nate Wiggins is very good, and Legette is obviously very good as well. And if you just had, those two going one-on-one at each other, I think that they'd each win their fair share of matchups. But my guess is Clemson's going to have extra help over the top. They're going to pay a lot of attention to him, especially if South Carolina can't get the running game going, and they're just going to try to take him out of the game and make sure that he's not the one that beats you. So I think it's having someone else for South Carolina step up, whether that's Mario Anderson, whether that's Simon, whether it's Knox, somebody at tight end. I think it's just having someone else step up. For Clemson, I think it's establishing the run and then making enough plays in the passing game. Jake Brennesel, I think, is a guy with Clemson so beat up at receiver. He had a huge game earlier this year against Miami. He's very good at going and high pointing the ball and making some tough contested catches. So he's a guy for sure that I think that they want to try to get involved, maybe open up some things, play action pass, and find him. So those would be a couple of keys to the game in addition to kind of some things we already talked about earlier.
Awesome. Appreciate you, Matt. Is that all we got? Is that all the time we got, Wes?
I think so.
Okay,
Matt,
yeah.
we appreciate you, man. Enjoy the game tomorrow, and we'll talk to you soon, okay?
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, man.
All right, Matt Connolly doing a great job there, filling us in on what's going on at Clemson. And I want to hit Chris on something he said sort of right there at the end that I think has increasingly become a key to this game in my mind. And obviously, you look at the Legette versus Wiggins battle, and let's do what Matt did and just kind of call that hey, Legette's going to win some, but Wiggins probably going to win some too. Like, these are two high level athletes that are going to be battling it out. So let's just assume Legette doesn't go off for one of his 200-yard performances, and let's just assume the other side, he does not get shut down. But to me, what he said about, all right, can somebody else step up for South Carolina and make some plays? Because this is going to be, I keep saying it, a different structured defense than what we saw last week with Kentucky. It's going to be much more about, hey, can you go win your one-on-one battles? And, I don't think it was a coincidence that South Carolina scored its 2 touchdowns in, situations where they got Legette in a one-on-one matchup with a Kentucky DB, and he showed why he is who he is. And so the second touchdown was definitely just a man-to-man coverage, and I think it was cover 0, nobody over the top. I don't remember necessarily whether that was a zone coverage that just sort of turned into a one-on-one situation or a true just man-to-man defense. But either way, South Carolina got it with Legette where he's there with nobody else around him, and he really just torched the guy on a double move on the first touchdown. But point being, you're going to have a lot more of these one-on-one situations. So Clemson, they're going to feel good about their guy. South Carolina, they're going to feel good about Legette. The battle within the battle within everything else we're talking about is, Clemson's nickelback, their slot corner against Amarian Brown. Clemson's other cornerback against Nicholas Harbor. The tight ends when they're matched up with linebackers and safeties. And can South Carolina consistently win some of those battles? I think is going to be a huge key. And what does Dow Loggains' game plan look like within sort of that same context? How to what lengths does he go to try and get some of these other guys involved in this football game?
Yeah, and you were pointing out this earlier on the radio. I mean, and we've talked about it before. South Carolina, after going really 2 seasons starting slow, it seemed like every week, they have not started slow this year, Wes. Like, and you could say, well, Chris, in this game, they didn't. Right. I'm just talking about generally, right? You think about even their losses, A&M. Like, they have been able to have a lot of success early. And so they've done a great job scripting early. Now, the flip side of that is teams have been able to adjust defensively, or maybe sometimes some teams have just been able to make some things happen where their talent catches up a little bit, like an A&M, for instance, they're super talented defensively. But so getting off to a good start in this one is important as a general point. Now, to what you said, they're going to have a big game from somebody else or some other people. And that could take form in Spencer Rattler just finding 10 different receivers over the course of a game. Like, would it be a surprise if we look up in the third quarter and there's a stat that, if you're watching the TV broadcast, it says Spencer Rattler's completed a pass to 9 different receivers? Wouldn't be a huge shock, wouldn't be a big shock if Xavier Legette has a big game. I do tend to think that it's going to be like you said, like Matt said, where he has a nice game. At home, he's only failed to get to 100 yards one time. That was last week against Kentucky, where he looked like the best player on the field, aside from Spencer Rattler. He had 94 yards. So I do think it's going to need to be a big game, from maybe the collective of South Carolina's receivers and tight ends, Trey Knox, Josh Simon, AB. You're going to have some other guys step up in his absence. Not his absence, but alongside him. And Wes, he brought up another good point before I forget this too, when you're looking at the other side, right? So everybody, I think, expects this to be a game where Clemson relies on running Cade Klubnik, having him create some things, which can be good and bad. Phil Maffa, Will Shipley, running those guys, but they're so beat up at receiver. The player he mentioned, Jake Brenningstool, really good tight end. I mean, the guy plays with an edge. He's a good route runner. He can catch the football. He's a big-time weapon in the red zone. And I think he's going to be a critical player for South Carolina to try to slow down, because what he may do is be able to occupy the nickel or occupy a safety who's down in the box and hit you with something Matt said, play action, right? Because we expect South Carolina to devote a lot of resources to the run in this game. Brenningstool's a guy that can hurt you in a big way if you let him. So I just wanted to make sure we mentioned that before I forgot. It's a great point by Matt.
Yeah, some good stuff to chew on there. By the way, y'all, I'm not going to get too far off topic, but Iowa and Nebraska currently, as we broadcast live, 10-10 with 4 minutes to go in the third quarter. So they are one touchdown away, depending on where you got the line at, from going over on what was, according to reports, this 25.5 point over under, as low as 24.5 on at least one sports book. The lowest over under in college football history. Which that doesn't pass the smell test to me. I don't know. Maybe they didn't have did they not have official lines? Surely back in like the days of the forward pass not existing yet, you had some.
Yeah, that's what came to my head, but that's also the era where you look back in the record books and you're like, Cumberland College beat Georgia Tech 300-0, and you're like, well, they didn't even pass the ball in that era. So, yeah, that game, offensive explosion, Wes. I'm about to turn that game on here while we talk, so I can keep tabs on it.
Yeah, we got a 10-10 battle right now. Nebraska just punted it back to Iowa. I think Nebraska is favored in this game, by the way, despite Iowa being 9-2, which is crazy to me. Anyway, so getting back to this game and some keys and some stuff like that. You mentioned the fast start. There would be, and I made this point earlier, man. If you go into a game and the best thing you can come up with for the reason a team is going to win is, the crowd's going to be loud. Which I feel like I have heard that a little bit too much this week. That perks my the red flag is up on that. If that's your best shot, and obviously we've seen it, and I'm guilty too. We've seen Williams-Brice at night in November be a scary place to play. And so is it a factor? Absolutely. But do you got to go make some plays yourself? Of course. And do you, if you're South Carolina, I think have to keep the game tight enough early on to where this crowd can stay a factor. I think the key to this game is pressure on Cade Klubnik, and I don't mean physical pressure. I mean pressure on him to perform. And to me, that goes back to the context of, down and distance, the context of game flow, the context of can they run the football at will? If you're South Carolina, to me, yes, getting some real pressure on him and hitting him and all those things, always a factor in every football game ever. But to me, this one is about, can you keep this South Carolina crowd tuned in? And, even as the atmosphere last week was incredible, there was a lull in there, Chris, where you looked around and everybody was starting to do what I did a second ago and start to yawn a little bit. And, it was kind of like, all right. And then it got sparked, right? Well, I think that's why having that quick start is so important for South Carolina, because you gotta keep this crowd in it. You got to keep Clemson to where when they it sounds like inevitably turn the football over, that it needs to matter. And they were talking about it in the Clemson North Carolina game. Klubnik has not played a lot of close games in his career up until this year, of course, when he's had a bunch of them as Clemson's quarterback. So I do wonder, Chris, does that not play into some of his in-game decisions? His mind clearly gets sped up because there's no other reason for a guy who literally was told, according to his own head coach, do not run the football here. And then he just runs it anyway. Like the processing right now is still sped up a little bit, I think.
Yeah, and he's for all intents and purposes a first-year player. And the arm talent's there, the athleticism is there, like the size from a physical tools standpoint, and a can he physically do that? It's there, right? That's why he was a big time prospect, But he's a guy that he's been through some battles now, but it has been very uneven and it's been very up and down. And you can just think of so many instances if you watch Clemson games this year where you've got a bewildered Dabo Swinney on the sideline, throwing his hands up, or halftime comments, or you could see him talking to Cade. What were you doing there? Talking in the post game about what was he doing there? Don't know what he was thinking. And so that's what you need. And I think I said earlier, Wes, on the radio, that pressure on Klubnik is a key to this game. And that can be a little bit of everything. It can be the crowd early or on third down or on fourth down. It can be the pressure from South Carolina's, front six, front seven. That can be a thing. And it can also be the pressure of the situation. This is your first rivalry game. This is the biggest, loudest, rowdiest crowd you will have seen on the road, right? But those things, it can be a vapor. I mean, I felt the same way as you in the Kentucky game. It was keyed up at first. It was keyed up after some big plays. But there were some times where the opposing team, Kentucky, was able to silence the crowd, and that could happen too. There's probably not going to be a great atmosphere if you look up and it's 17-0 Clemson in the second quarter. It won't be a great atmosphere unless the team starts coming back and some hope kind of rebuilds. On the other hand, if it's 14-0, it's Carolina, and Cade Klubnik has a 3rd and 11 from his own 24, it's going to be real loud, and that's going to create even more pressure to perform there. So I think the more we talk through it, fast start, we talk about it a lot, and that's one of those things that could probably be a key to every game. But here, especially given who's in play, what's at stake, I think you could easily put that as a key as well.
No doubt, man. Hey, real quick, going to tell you about our friends at Liberty Tax. Overcome your tax anxiety, 803-462-5576. Larry and his entire team at their 3 convenient locations here in the Midlands want to help you have your tax time go as smooth and as pressure-free as possible. Call them today, 803-462-5576. And like we always tell you, tax time not quite here yet, but if you've had big life changes or if you can anticipate big changes that will affect your taxes next year, you may want to go ahead and call and meet with them because there may be some things you could do during this last month to set yourself up better for next year when tax time does come. Again, 803-462-5576, our friends there at Liberty Tax. Chris, by the way, had a question. Cocky Joe said, is there a recruit list for tomorrow? We have a still, I would say, unfinished recruit list, but it is a recruit list nonetheless on Gamecock Central. If you're listening to this later on the podcast, hopefully by then we will have a more complete recruit list on there as well. So we will continue to effort that. But either way, go check it out, GamecockCentral.com. Should be a nice list of guys on campus for the Gamecocks. And, you hope if you're Carolina that they're going to be able to see a great atmosphere, which I got no doubt it will be at the beginning. You got to just keep it going. You got to keep it rolling. And so, Chris, I think for this game, I tend to always go back to that front that Clemson has. And, we've talked about it probably this week, but maybe not too much during this episode. 83 tackles for loss for Clemson this year, forced on defense. Top 10 in that statistic. They're more like middle of the pack, at least in the ACC, as far as sacks themselves go. But to me, sacks are really not a great stat. They don't always tell the story. Tackles for loss, actually, even though it's not some advanced metric, I feel like it tells a pretty good story about where you are in terms of creating disruption, creating havoc, some people call it, up front. So for Carolina, I mean, that to me is another big key in this game. Like we talk about, run the football, stop the run. Always a key, right? Every game that's ever been played. But what do you think about taking that a little bit step further, providing a little nuance, just avoid the negative plays. Like, run the football. I don't think there's a number I put on, oh, you got to rush for 100 yards. No, just don't have these plays where you're going backwards.
I totally agree. And run the football is not a key to the game for me. Now, if South Carolina, let's say a very unexpected thing happens and we're sitting here on Monday, Wes, talking about South Carolina ran for 200 yards. They will have won the game, I'm pretty sure. But we don't expect that. And I don't think South Carolina's built for that. And I don't think this matchup with who they're going against, they're not built for that either. I mean, Clemson's got Peter Woods, who's former 5-star, one of the best young defenders in the country, didn't even start for them last week, right? He can come off the bench. They've got a pretty deep group. They've got a good group, probably two of the best linebackers in the country, or maybe the best linebacker tandem that South Carolina's faced this year. And they're playing better in the secondary, right? I mean, they got some guys on this defense. So that is the bigger thing for me. And it is not a great on paper matchup, Wes, because you have a Clemson team that's forced a lot of tackles for loss and negative plays. You have a South Carolina team that's allowed a lot of tackles for loss and negative plays. Even in the Kentucky game last week, Spencer Rattler took an 18-yard loss on a sack that knocked the Gamecocks out of field goal range. Xavier Legette lost 17 yards on a run, right? Now, I'm sure those are things that those two veteran guys who are South Carolina's best players, they were pointed out on film, and you're going to try to correct those and go into this week knowing that that's a point of emphasis against a very active, very talented defense. But nonetheless, you don't want to be in 3rd and 16 against these guys. You don't want the procedural penalties that hampered you against Kentucky at times. You got to be able to, like a gain of 1 is actually okay in some instances. You just don't want those big negative losses. That is what they have to avoid. And if they can only have a few of those in this game as opposed to 9, 10, 12, their odds of winning are going to be a lot higher.
Did you end up getting this game on, by the way, Chris?
It's on. I'm checking it out.
Yeah. Wow. Y'all need to turn it on if you're listening to us live. I'm like fascinated by this all of a sudden, but I've heard of the turf monster coming up and tripping people. The Nebraska quarterback Purdy just went to run on a 3rd and 7, and the invisible turf monster just knocked the ball out of his hand, got recovered by Nebraska, and then they just had to waste the timeout because they started lining up for a 60-yard field goal for some reason with 13 minutes to go in the game.
Everything you said could be boiled down to, for some reason, like this entire game and experience.
And now they just down the punt perfectly at the 1. So
It all worked out for him.
maybe we'll get a safety here.
The hilarity of just talking about punting in the Iowa-Nebraska game. Very on brand.
Very much so. All right, let's see. Big Red says, are all the extra things happening tomorrow a distraction for a young Gamecock team in an important game? No. I don't think this team could care less about special guests and stuff like that at the game. And really, at this point, this is not a young team, in my opinion. Like, even, Chris, even early on this year, there was this thought process, hey, it's a young South Carolina football team. There are some young guys playing, but, Spencer Rattler, not young. Xavier Legette, not young. Mario Anderson, obviously was new to South Carolina, not young. Marcellus Dial, not young. Most of your defensive line, not young. So I don't really think it's ever really truly been a young team. It's been a team that has had a lot of true freshmen who have had to play roles. Now, your offensive line, certainly, as you had both injuries and issues, they became a really young front, and you had 2 true freshmen starting against SEC opponents. That's never necessarily good. But I would say overall, just to answer the question, no, I don't think they're remotely concerned about any of that. This game will be decided on the field. Ultimately, even like I said, the crowd it'll be fun. It'll be a great atmosphere. Gamecock and Clemson fans are, I think, going to enjoy being out there in a great game, great atmosphere. But as far as eventually this game's going to be won or lost on the field. So as we get into that, we've already talked about some keys to victory, Chris. I know you've got your keys to victory, official keys to victory coming out later on. Are there any other ones that you think are must mention before we sort of get to our predictions here?
I think we already mentioned one, didn't we? Unless I'm mixing up, a conversation you and I had or something. But I think you alluded to it with Matt, and that is, make the difference in Cade Klubnik and Spencer Rattler matter in this game. Make it to where Spencer Rattler can accentuate his strengths. Defense. Don't give Cade Klubnik a free pass, right? And keep this game, close enough, or frankly, the even better option would be have Clemson playing catch up and keep that pressure on them to where you're then making that difference show through. Spencer Rattler, you don't want this to be a game where you said, man, Spencer, he put up, kind of like the North Carolina game, right? Offense only scored 17 points. Spencer was a warrior. He kept getting hit. He got up. He took care of the football. He made some big plays. But overall, you're just not productive enough. That's not what you want, right? Spencer was actually great against North Carolina, but it didn't matter because defensively, you didn't get enough stops. Offensively, you couldn't protect him enough, right? So that negative play prevention. And then, of course, Wes, I think we hit on this, the turnover margin, right? So both of these teams have been really good. I think they both in the past 3 games have 9 forced turnovers. To be fair, I know people don't like fair during rivalry week. It's just bash everything Clemson. But, Clemson's played a tougher schedule over the past 3 weeks at home than South Carolina has at home. Both these teams playing their best ball at home past 3 weeks. They've gotten on the right track with turnovers. South Carolina has been really, really good taking care of the football offensively. So you got to continue that. And then you've got to not hope. Hope is not a strategy. Like you said, you don't want to rely on a team gifting you turnovers, even though Clemson seems to do that pretty well. Go out there, force the issue, create some turnovers, win the turnover battle. If the Gamecocks can do that, Wes, and they do all three of those things, it has a chance, I think, to be a really, really good night.
By the way, I hate to keep going back to this, but the best thing in the world almost just happened. Iowa's quarterback got stepped on, handing the ball off, backed up into their own end zone, and almost fell backwards into a safety, but somehow handed the ball off while falling down. So just had to complete that sequence for everybody. Turn this game on, seriously. Like it's not good football, but it is very entertaining football for many, many, many reasons. But do what, Chris?
I saw it. He just flipped the ball to the guy.
Yes.
Like it wasn't even a handoff. It was I'm falling down and let me throw the ball up in desperation.
Yes, reverse hand backwards flip somehow. And there's two dudes in the stands wearing shirts that say punts, which is awesome. So awesome. Anyway, back to our game. Dude, I'm sure we're missing something that's going to be important. We talked about the front quite a bit for Clemson. Jeremiah Trotter, though, oh my gosh, this guy, stud. I do want to go back to one point real quick. Dow Loggins and his game plan. Like, I'm fascinated to see what he's going to come up with.
Yeah.
We know those quick throws to the outside have been an extension of South Carolina's running game. And you know, I think when you play a team that's playing a lot of zone, when you're playing Kentucky, those plays, you have a little bit more room sometimes to kind of throw those passes out there and get maybe a couple of yards. But then you see those zone defenses kind of come up and their whole thing is like, oh, come tackle you and keep that as a 2 or 3 yard play. I feel like when you play some of these man teams, especially aggressive ones, those quick throws either become like negative plays, like they get just completely blown up, or a guy sort of gets picked or, kind of just taken out that's in coverage on that particular receiver you're throwing the ball to or running back you're throwing the ball to, and they can become big plays. And, I would imagine, Chris, we're going to see quite a bit of South Carolina do some of those plays that I guess you still call them screens, but we've seen him get the ball out real quick to like Josh Simon, where it's designed that he catches the football in the flat, like at the line of scrimmage, but then you instantly block the player who was trying to cover Josh, one-on-one. And, we've actually seen a couple of those where it was kind of close in terms of possibly being an offensive pass interference. And we saw South Carolina run a quick sort of throw into the flat, a swing pass last week. And it was designed for Omega Blake to block the guy who had Mario Anderson in coverage, and it ended up being a blindside block. So I feel like you got to be very careful on those, but those will be in the game plan. Like, those will be a big part of it. I'll be curious to see what little tweaks have been put in by Loggins to try and give South Carolina some room on those plays. Like, remember the beginning of the North Carolina game? South Carolina's throwing quick balls to the outside, and North Carolina's just getting off blocks, making hard hits in the perimeter, and it was just the same as if you had ran the ball for nothing, basically. So that will be a key to me. How much success on the perimeter throws are you having if you're South Carolina?
Yeah, North Carolina in that game was, making one-on-one tackles and getting off blocks. And we've seen a lot of inconsistencies, I think, Wes, with perimeter blocking for a team that is not great at just lining up and running the football. South Carolina is not that. You're right. That does need to be an identity. You got to be able to make some things happen with the short passing game as an extension. And here's the problem. Since the perimeter blocking has been problematic and inconsistent, and since Clemson's a good defense, there's potential for negative plays there, right? I mean, you'd rather throw a ball downfield and have 2nd and 10 than have 2nd and 14 because you blew a perimeter block and a guy gets tackled for a loss. And we've seen that some this year. So that will be fascinating. The adjustments there. How do we see Lenora Sellers, right? What more is there to that package? Whether it's some different run concepts. Is there a pass mixed in there? I feel like we'll see Sellers, especially in those short yardage situations. That'll be another schematically. That may be one of the more fascinating things to me. But yeah, the initial game plan where South Carolina has been really good. Can they come out? Can they score early and force Clemson to kind of play up to them? That'll be fascinating, and that'll obviously be critical to this game.
Yeah, for sure, man. All right, so before we close it out, Chris, let's tell everybody about our friends at Bird Dogs. And we've not told you about Bird Dogs this week. And so head on over to birddogs.com. And this deal, honestly, may be going out of here soon. So go ahead and get it while you can. Birddogs.com/Gamecocks. And when you make a purchase there, I'll just leave the legalese to whatever it says when it pops up. Because, again, this deal may be going away soon. Go to birddogs.com/Gamecocks. And when you make a purchase, you hopefully will still get something free. But either way, Chris, we've been rocking the Bird Dogs shirts, the Bird Dogs shorts. And I thought Bird Dogs was just a shorts company. I've fallen in love with their polo shirts. And they have joggers as well. They're whatever it is that you're into as far as whether it be clothes that you wear more in athletic settings or in more professional settings, Bird Dogs has got an option for you.
Yep, I got the pants on right now, Wes. Honestly, a little chilly outside this morning. Super comfortable, nice enough to wear out. The hat also, don't forget the hat, really good. I know we both love the polo. Bird Dogs is outstanding. Had never worn them before we were able to partner up with these guys. So make sure you support them. Birddogs.com. See if the promo code Gamecocks does anything for you, and see what you can find out of their store. Great stuff from those folks.
All right, let's close it out, man. Final prediction, Chris. What you got?
Picking the Gamecocks in a narrow one, Wes. If this was in Death Valley, I'd most likely be picking Clemson. It is at home. Both these teams have been a lot different, I think, home and away. Again, Williams-Brice Stadium crowd at the outset is going to be loud. That may have an effect on Clemson's offense at the beginning. It's going to be up to the Gamecocks, the actual team, to make sure that home field advantage can ring true. But I see South Carolina doing just enough. Points are going to be hard to come by, but I've got a 3-point win for the Gamecocks, and I believe I picked 27-24 in this one.
I got the Gamecocks too. I honestly can't tell you how it's going to play out. I think it's going to have to be somewhat low scoring for South Carolina to win it. I don't really like their chances in a shootout just because of that Clemson front. Although there is a world where maybe Rattler just gets hot, South Carolina's able to throw it around, and they get just enough from the running game where they can put up some points. So can't completely rule that out, but for the most part, I think it's got to be a 20-something to 20-something win if South Carolina is going to win the game. And I've got it at 24-23, another 1-point game. I actually had a 1-point game in my prediction last year, so I'm going to stick with that. And sorry, y'all, I'm so distracted by Iowa, Nebraska. It'll be a good day for the Gamecock fans, obviously, if that ends up being the case. So also, I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to tick y'all off for a game that I think is going to be close. So it's a homer pick. We'll see what happens. And I think I bought it when we were talking about the 4-for-4 finish to the year.
There you go.
I guess a month ago. So I got to stick with that, right?
I think I sold it, but I gave my room, of course, in typical fashion. I said I could wiggle out of it, but we didn't readdress it. But I guess I am buying it now because they have a good shot to make it happen, and I think it'll happen this week. So we'll see how it goes.
Yep. All right, y'all. Hope y'all have a great Thanksgiving. Hope y'all have a great weekend. And we're going to give y'all time to go watch the final 8 minutes of this Nebraska-Iowa big-time matchup. So for Chris, I'm Wes. We appreciate each and every one of you. We appreciate all of our sponsors as well. Go check those out. Check those guys out and support them because they support us. All right. We'll see you all Monday. Have